Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something, well, it's a little unsettling, but it's an incredibly powerful strategy. We're talking about how to make yourself so essential, so deeply woven into the fabric of power, that you just can't be gotten rid of. All right, to really get this, we've got to start with a story. And it's one of those stories that starts with this massive success, but, has a really tragic ending. We're heading back to 15th century Venice to see just how quickly success can turn into, well, total ruin. So, let's talk about this guy, the Count of Carmagnola. Now, back in his day, he was a superstar, one of the best, most brilliant mercenary soldiers. They called them condottieri in all of Italy. I mean, this guy was a true master of the battlefield. And he was the go-to guy for the city of Venice, their star general. For years, he just kept delivering. Victory after victory after victory. He became a huge public hero, showered with all these honors by the people who hired him. By all accounts, this guy was at the absolute top of his game. Then, in 1442, he gets a summons. He's being called back to Venice. And it doesn't sound like bad news at all. In fact, it sounds like the ultimate reward. They're talking a grand reception, a huge dinner with the Doge himself, the leader of Venice. This is the big one. But as he's walking into the palace, something feels off. He realizes the guards aren't taking him toward the dining halls. No, they're taking a different route, a path that leads across the famous or infamous Bridge of Sighs, which, as everyone knew, only led to one place, the dungeon. And just like that, the very next day, after what was basically a fake trial on some made-up charge, Carmagnola was beheaded right there in the main square. The same people who had cheered for him as a hero were now watching in horror as he was executed. So you have to ask yourself, why? I mean, how on earth does something like that happen? Well, the answer is shocking, and it's brutally simple. The thing is, Carmagnola, for all his amazing victories, just wasn't essential. He wasn't indispensable. See, there were other soldiers out there, guys just as brave, guys who were younger, and hey, cheaper to hire. He completely took his own value for granted, and because he was replaceable, he was simply thrown away. And his story, as tragic as it is, perfectly sets up the core lesson for today. It's what our source material calls the law of indispensability, and it's going to flip the way you probably think about power and freedom completely on its head. So here's the big idea, right? We tend to think that real power means being independent, not needing anyone. But this law says nope, it's the exact opposite. It's all about creating dependency. It's about making it so other people need you for their own success, for their own security. That's when you get real freedom. Okay, so if Carmagnola is our cautionary tale, let's look at the flip side. Let's look at a masterclass in how to do this right. We're going to talk about a guy who understood this law perfectly and used it to become one of the most powerful men in Europe, Otto von Bismarck. Now, Bismarck's whole strategy was just fascinating because it seems so backwards. See, instead of cozying up to the most powerful people around, he did the opposite. He sought out weak, insecure rulers, and then he made himself into their strength, their intelligence, their spine. He became the essential tool they couldn't live without. He started with this guy, King Frederick William IV of Prussia, who was known for being pretty weak and indecisive. So Bismarck just jumps in and becomes his #1 defender. He builds up the army, he shoves back against any political rivals, and he basically restores the power of the monarchy. He made the king look strong, yeah, but everyone knew that strength was coming from one place and one place only, Bismarck. And this is where it gets really good. The next king, William I, comes to the throne and he hated Bismarck. Personally could not stand the guy. But here's the thing. He inherited a kingdom that was a total mess, full of enemies, and he felt completely overwhelmed. He had no choice. He had to rely on Bismarck's strength, on his cunning. So even though he hated him, the king was totally and completely dependent. So let's just lay this out, side by side. You've got Carmagnola, who served the powerful and just kind of assumed he'd always be valuable. Then you have Bismarck, who served the weak and actively created his value by making himself essential. One guy, easily thrown away the second he became a problem. The other guy, he became impossible to get rid of, and he ended up being the real power in the empire. I mean, the results kind of speak for themselves, don't they? Okay, so how do you actually do this? You don't have to be a 19th century statesman to use this idea. The source material actually gives us a whole toolkit, a bunch of different strategies for building this kind of dependency. So how do you make yourself indispensable? Turns out there's more than one way to do it. You can go for what's called intensive power. That's where you have a unique talent that nobody else has. It just can't be copied. Or you can go for extensive power. That's where you weave yourself into so many different parts of an organization that getting rid of you would just make the whole thing fall apart. And then there are even more subtle tricks, like creating a chain of dependence or, knowing secrets. Let's take intensive power. Think about Michelangelo. Okay, his boss was the Pope, Pope Julius II, literally one of the most powerful men on the planet. But the Pope knew something really important. Michelangelo could go find another rich guy to pay him, but he, the Pope, could never find another Michelangelo. That one-of-a-kind talent gave the artist a ton of power. Then you've got the other side of the coin, extensive power. A great example is Henry Kissinger in the Nixon White House. The guy survived all these insane political fights because he had his fingers in everything. He was involved in so many different departments, so many aspects of the government, that firing him would have caused total chaos. He basically made himself the spider at the center of the web. And then there's this idea of a chain of dependence. This one's really clever. Back in the 50s, a studio boss named Harry Cohn refused to fire a writer who was on the Hollywood blacklist. Now, he wasn't doing it out of principle. It was purely strategic. See, that writer was the key to his biggest star, Humphrey Bogart. And Bogart, well, he was the key to the entire studio's success. Cohn was trapped. He couldn't fire the writer without risking his biggest star. So, all of this brings us to the big takeaway, the central paradox of this whole strategy. Really, what this is all about is making you rethink what it even means to be free and powerful in the first place. And here it is. This is the key. We think freedom is about being alone, on an island, not needing anyone. But this strategy says real freedom is being like ivy on a tree, so wrapped up, so entangled with the people in power that they can't get rid of you without damaging themselves. Their need for you, well, that's what sets you free. And let's be super clear about something. This isn't about being friends or being well-liked. Not at all. The source material ties this straight back to Machiavelli. The person who depends on you doesn't have to like you. In fact, they might even hate you. But what they must do is fear what would happen if you were gone. Fear is something you can control. Love? Not so much. So at the end of the day, we're left with a pretty uncomfortable question, aren't we? In a world where things are always changing, where power shifts all the time, this strategy really makes you think about where security comes from. Is it better to be loved and disposable, or is it better to be feared and absolutely undeniably necessary? We usually think of honesty as a good thing, right? A virtue, the foundation of trust. But what if I told you it could also be a weapon? Today, we're diving into a really powerful and frankly kind of unsettling idea. Using honesty not for truth, but as a calculated strategy. I mean, just listen to this. This is the core idea from our source material, and it's completely counterintuitive. The idea that a single, perfectly timed act of sincerity can create a smokescreen for a whole bunch of deception. It's a fascinating and, let's be real, a pretty dangerous concept. All right, so let's break this down. What exactly is this tactic, and how does it work? Because we're not just talking about telling a little white lie here. Oh no, this is a whole different ballgame. It's a carefully built strategy designed for maximum psychological damage. And the word to really focus on here is strategic. This isn't some random moment of truthfulness. It's a planned out, premeditated move. It's a single gesture that's designed to do one thing and one thing only, get someone to completely let their guard down. So here's the playbook, and it's chillingly simple. Step 1. You offer up the bait, that one calculated act of honesty. Maybe you admit to a small, harmless mistake. Step 2. You just wait. You let that gesture work its magic. And then, step 3, once their guard is down, the door is wide open for you to do whatever you want. To really get a grip on this, our source uses this fantastic metaphor, comparing this whole strategy to one of the most famous tricks in all of history. And get this, it doesn't even have to be an act of honesty. As the source points out, a timely gift, a sudden act of generosity, can work just as well. It looks like a friendly gesture, but really, it's a Trojan horse being wheeled right up to your front door. And that's really the heart of it, right? Just like that giant wooden horse was brought inside the walls of Troy because everyone thought it was a gift, a single act of honesty or kindness can sneak right past a person's natural skepticism, completely bypassing their defensive walls.
Okay, so we get what it is and how it's done, but the big question is why? Why on earth is this simple little trick so incredibly effective on a psychological level?
I mean, think about it for a second. We're all pretty savvy, right? We deal with little deceptions all the time. So, why does this particular strategy work on even the most cynical, most suspicious people out there?
Well, it all comes down to the raw psychological punch it delivers. An unexpected act of honesty just feels so real, so genuine, that it shorts out our critical thinking. And once your guard is down, it doesn't just lower a little bit, it completely collapses. It creates what the source calls a hole in their armor, leaving you totally exposed. I know. This all might sound a little bit theoretical. So let's look at a real-life historical example that shows just how devastating this strategy can be when it's put into action. So let me introduce you to the Count of Carmagnola. This guy, according to our source material, was a true artist of this tactic. He was a master of the game, someone who built an entire career on manipulating how people saw him. He's described as a forerunner of the Machiavellian courtier. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying this guy was a next-level political operator. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a strategist who knew that what people think is true is often way more powerful than what actually is true. So let's just follow his path for a second. He makes a name for himself in Milan, and he becomes known as this new type of strategic thinker. So what was his signature move? He'd get close to a powerful rival, like this one guy, Medical Universale, and then he'd honestly reveal some fake minor plot against him. This one act of fake loyalty made him seem like a crucial ally. And then, once he had completely earned their trust, he was in the perfect position to orchestrate their total ruin. So, you see what he did there? The Count's story is the perfect real-world example. He mastered the art of perception. He understood that a single, believable gesture of sincerity, his so-called honesty, was actually the most powerful weapon he had. It was the key that unlocked all of his rivals' defenses and led straight to their downfall.
And that really leaves us with a pretty unsettling question, doesn't it? This whole strategy flips our basic ideas about virtue right on their head. So if honesty itself can be the most effective disguise of all, how in the world are we supposed to know who or what to actually trust? What if I told you that there's this unspoken rule of power that works just as well in a modern boardroom as it did in an ancient throne room? It's a rule that pretty much governs every negotiation, every request, every single alliance. And most of us get it completely wrong, so let's break it down. Just think about it for a second. When you really need something from someone, especially someone with more power than you, what's your first instinct? Do you bring up your loyalty? All the good things you've done in the past? Well, it turns out that the biggest mistake you can make is often the one that feels the most natural. And there it is. That's the core principle. It's blunt, it's pragmatic, and honestly, it's incredibly effective. You have to forget about fairness, forget about gratitude, forget about past favors. The shortest, straightest line to getting what you want is to show the other person what's in it for them. And to see just how high the stakes are, let's look at someone who ignored this rule and ended up paying the ultimate price. All right, so for our first story, we're jumping into the world of 14th century Italy. I mean, this was a place of ruthless ambition, constantly shifting loyalties. And it's just a perfect cautionary tale of what happens when you appeal to a powerful person's heart instead of their own self-interest. Okay, so the story is a real tragedy of miscalculation. You have this powerful family, the Poggios, who basically put a prince named Castruccio in power. But, you guessed it, he quickly forgot who helped him get there. So, when they plot a rebellion, a family elder, Stefano, he steps in. He thought he could reason with the prince, So he goes to him, appeals to their shared history, to justice, to mercy. And Castruccio listens. He even promises to forgive them. But then, in this absolutely chilling move, he has the entire family executed. And this is where you can see the two worlds just colliding. Stefano was speaking the language of the past, right? Generosity, mercy, justice. But Castruccio, he was only thinking about the future. He didn't hear an old friend asking for a favor. No, he heard a new enemy reminding him of a debt. And for a guy like him, the easiest way to erase a debt was to erase the creditor. And that right there is the cold, hard logic at play. By reminding Castruccio of everything he owed them, Stefano basically turned that gratitude into a heavy burden. A burden the prince was just itching to get rid of. So instead of making his family safe, he accidentally handed Castruccio the perfect excuse to eliminate them for good. So that's what happens when an appeal goes horribly wrong. But what does a successful one actually look like?
Well, for that, we're going to travel even further back in time, all the way to ancient Greece, to see this very same rule applied with absolute masterful precision. The stakes here could not be higher. You've got two powers, Corinth and Corcyra, and they are about to go to war. They both know that the winner will be whoever can get the mighty Athenian navy on their side. So, of course, they both send ambassadors to Athens to make their case. And wow, did they take different approaches. The ambassador from Corinth, he went down the exact same path as Stephano, appealing to past friendship, trying to make the Athenians feel guilty. But the ambassador from Corcyra, he completely ignored the past. He focused on one single, powerful vision of the future, an alliance between their two navies that would create a force so powerful it would be unstoppable. And for the Athenians, the choice was a no-brainer. These guys were master pragmatists. An appeal to gratitude just felt like an obligation, a burden. But the promise of more power in the future, now that was an investment. They didn't choose the loyal friend from the past. They chose the profitable partner for the future.
Okay, so we've seen how it works and how it doesn't. But how do you actually use this in real life? Well, it takes a pretty fundamental shift in how you think. You have to get out of your own head and get deep into the mind of the person you're talking to.
It really boils down to 3 steps. Step 1, just forget what you want. Seriously, to them, your needs are just background noise. Step 2, and this is the hard part, you have to figure out what they want. You have to become a student of their motivations, their fears, their ambitions. And then finally, step 3, you frame your request as the solution to their problem. You make your success a part of their success. And you gotta remember, self-interest isn't just about money. Not at all. It comes in so many different currencies. For some people, sure, it's wealth. For others, it's security, or maybe their reputation. For some, it's the simple satisfaction of beating a rival. And some people are just motivated by pure practicality and efficiency. The real key is figuring out which currency the person you're dealing with actually values. This quote just nails it. There's this fantastic example of Yalu Chutai, who was an advisor to Genghis Khan. Khan wanted to just level entire Chinese cities, just wipe them off the map. Chutai didn't waste his breath appealing to morality or saving culture. He knew Khan was a barbarian driven by greed, so he just told him that taxing the cities would make him way richer than destroying them ever could. And guess what? It worked. He used greed as a lever and saved millions of lives. Now, like any really powerful rule, this one has a huge exception. And a true master of persuasion knows that sometimes appealing to mercy is the smartest play, but only when being merciful actually serves the other person's self-interest. And this is what we call the reversal. See, for some people, their self-interest isn't about wealth or traditional power. It's all about the feeling of superiority and the public reputation they get from being seen as generous or charitable. Their ego gets a huge boost from the simple act of giving. So the crucial point is that the rule hasn't actually changed at all. You've just correctly identified that their self-interest is really their vanity. So for these folks, you flip the script. Give them a chance to look good, to feel powerful by being charitable, and they will be more than happy to help you.
Okay, let's wrap this all up. There's one final metaphor that I think just perfectly captures everything we've talked about today.
Every time you ask for help, this is the choice you have to make. You can rely on the cord of gratitude, which is like a single frayed thread. It's based on someone's fickle memory, and it's ready to snap at the first sign of trouble. Or you can build your connection with the cord of mutual self-interest. This one's a thick rope woven together with many fibers of tangible benefits. It's strong, it's reliable, and it's built to last. So, I guess the final question to leave you with is this. The next time you need to persuade someone, which lifeline are you going to throw them? The weak one that's tied to the past, or the strong one that's tied to their future? The choice is yours.
Let's be real. In pretty much any game, whether it's business, politics, or just life, the person who wins is usually the one with the best information. I'm not talking about the stuff that everybody knows. I mean the real secrets, the kind of knowledge that gives you a genuine edge. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the art of getting those secrets, how to pose as a friend, but work as a spy.
It's a pretty radical idea, right? To see the world as this giant chessboard, where every single conversation, every little interaction, is a chance to figure out your opponent's next move. Well, there was one art dealer who took this philosophy to the absolute extreme. He pulled off a masterpiece of espionage that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with business.
So we're calling this one the perfect art heist. But here's the twist.
The prize wasn't a painting on a wall, it was the collector himself. This is the incredible story of how one man used years, and I mean years, of patient spying to close one of the biggest business deals of the 20th century.
Okay, so let's meet our planers. On one side, you've got Andrew Mellon. Think titan of industry, unbelievably rich, and famous for being intensely prided. Then, on the other side, you have Joseph Duveen, a flashy, talkative, larger-than-life art dealer. Mellon had heard all about Duveen and wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. And, for a guy like Duveen, that made Mellon the ultimate prize, the one client that everyone said was completely impossible to get. Now this is where things get really interesting, because Duveen was playing the long game. He didn't just try to cold call him or get a meeting. No, he invested years, secretly building a complete psychological profile of his target. He paid off Mellon's valets, his maids, his butlers, and he learned everything. I mean, from Mellon's favorite color, to his secret passion for certain artists, to his daily routines. He was literally mapping out the man's mind.
And here's where all that planning becomes pure theater. Duveen finds out Mellon's heading to London, so he books the suite directly underneath his. He has his valet coordinate with Mellon's valet. The very second Mellon leaves his room to go to the elevator, Duveen gets a signal, and he casually steps out of his own room to catch the exact same elevator. The trap for this chance encounter is now perfectly set.
And, well, the rest is history. In the elevator, Duveen just happens to mention he's on his way to the National Gallery, which of course is Mellon's exact destination. As they walk together, Duveen starts talking, and his insights seem almost telepathic, perfectly echoing Mellon's own private hidden tastes in art. Mellon was completely charmed, totally mystified, and absolutely won over. The impossible client became his best client for life, all thanks to years of patient, meticulous spying.
Duveen's heist is just an incredible story, but what was the real power at play here? It's not just about having a few facts. It's about what that secret knowledge allows you to become. Let's dig into the principle behind this whole thing.
This is really the key to it all. See, Duveen's competitors all thought he had some kind of sixth sense because he always seemed to know what his clients wanted before they did. But it wasn't magic. It was strategic spying. This foreknowledge made him seem so charming and insightful when really he was just incredibly well informed.
And listen, this is not some new business school hack. We're talking ancient wisdom here. Over 2,000 years ago, the legendary general Sun Tzu wrote that the key to any victory isn't really about strength or even luck. It's about foreknowledge. It's the ability to see the entire battlefield before the fighting even starts. And where does that vision come from? It comes from spies.
I just love this metaphor. Think about it. While everybody else is walking around using their two eyes, just seeing what's on the surface, the spy is operating with a third eye. And this third eye gives you a kind of superpower, the ability to see people's hidden motives, their insecurities, their secret desires. It is an almost unfair advantage in any situation.
Okay, so having this third eye sounds pretty powerful, right? But how do you actually develop it? Well, it's not about being a psychic, it's about technique. So let's open up the secret toolkit used by some of history's greatest masters of intrigue.
Here are 4 classic moves right from the playbook. First up, you've got the listener, perfected by the diplomat Talleyrand. Basically, you just shut up and let other people talk. They'll reveal everything. Second, the agitator, from the philosopher Schopenhauer. You poke and prod people to make them emotional and unguarded. Third, there's the false confession. You tell someone a fake secret of yours to get a real one of theirs in return. And finally, the loyalty test. You set up a little trap to see who's really on your team.
Now let's zoom in on those first two for a second, because they are complete polar opposites. Talleyrand's method is all about making yourself a blank slate. You become so agreeable, so interested, that people can't help but fill the silence with their own thoughts, their own secrets. Schopenhauer's method is the exact reverse. You intentionally contradict someone, you annoy them, until their emotional reaction just makes them blurt out things they will definitely regret later. Both are paths to the truth, they just use totally different psychological tools to get there.
So up until now, we've only talked about offense, how to gather information. But what about defense? In a world full of spies, maybe the most critical skill of all is knowing how to protect your own secrets. And this is where we get into the fine art of counterespionage.
And who better to learn from than Winston Churchill? This quote is just brilliant. The idea isn't just to hide the truth, it's to actively surround the truth with false information. You don't just lock the door, you build a whole maze of fake doors around it so that anyone trying to break in just gets hopelessly lost.
This story illustrates the point perfectly.
Picture this. It's 1944 and German V-1 rocket bombs are slamming into London. Now, the Germans were using spies on the ground to tell them how accurate their bombs were. But here's the genius part. The Allies had captured all these spies and turned them into double agents. So they had these agents feed back totally false information. They reported that the bombs were going too far, that they were overshooting central London. So what did the Germans do? They corrected their aim, shortening the range. The result? The bombs started falling shorter and shorter until they were eventually landing harmlessly on cows in the fields out in the countryside.
So here's the big takeaway. If spying is all about opening your own third eye, then disinformation, well, that's about blinding your enemy. You essentially turn them into a cyclops. They think they can see clearly, but their perception is totally warped. They have information, sure, but it's the wrong information, which you could argue is even more dangerous than having no information at all.
And this brings this whole idea right back to us today. I mean, in an age of social media, constant data collection, these principles are absolutely everywhere. It forces you to ask a really important question. In our own lives, who is gathering information? What kind of picture are they building of us? Who is reading your secrets?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really powerful and, let's be honest, pretty ruthless strategic principle. Law 15, crush your enemy totally. So the core idea here, it is completely uncompromising. The source material argues that any mercy you show to a feared enemy, well, that's not a virtue. It's actually a future threat that you yourself are creating. You see, that half-dead viper isn't going to thank you for sparing it. Nope, it's just going to wait until its venom is strong enough to come back and strike you down. Think of it this way. If you leave even one single ember smoldering, a fire is eventually going to rake out. The text suggests that you lose far more by stopping halfway, by showing a little mercy or hoping for some kind of reconciliation, than you do through the complete and total destruction of your rival. So what happens when you ignore this law? Well, to see exactly what happens, let's dive into a classic cautionary tale from Chinese history. It's all about the fatal price of hesitation. Here we've got our two main rivals, and you couldn't find two more different people. On one side, you have Xiang Yu. He's a powerful warrior, born into nobility, but his emotions, they often got the best of him. And on the other side, Lu Peng. He came from nothing, a peasant, not much of a soldier, but he was incredibly cunning and smart enough to actually listen to his advisor. You won't believe how many chances Xiang Yu had to finish this. He had Lu Peng right in his grasp over and over again. At a banquet, he could have had him assassinated, but he hesitated. Later, he had Lu Peng's army cornered and starving, and again, he chose mercy. Every single time, some fatal sympathy made him pull back. But when the tables turned, Lu Peng, who had learned from all his rivals' mistakes, showed no hesitation at all. And this right here was the critical difference. This was the game changer. While Xiang Yu was going back and forth, Lu Peng's advisor gave him this incredibly stark warning. Lu Peng actually listened, and by being decisive where his rival had been merciful, he sealed his victory. And just look at how it all played out. The outcome really says it all. Xiang Yu's hesitation led directly to his own destruction. Lu Peng's ruthlessness, it led him to found the legendary Han Dynasty. The lesson from this is crystal clear. Any sympathy you have for an enemy can actually strengthen their hatred and all but guarantee your eventual doom. Okay, so that's what happens when you hesitate. But what about the other side of the coin? Let's look at a story where this law wasn't just followed, it was taken to its most extreme and ruthless conclusion. The story of Empress Wu's rise to power is, well, it's just jaw-droppingly brutal. She didn't just defeat her rivals, she systematically eliminated every single person who stood in her way. And that includes her own family. She framed people, she poisoned them, she exiled them, clearing her path to the throne one body at a time until there was literally no one left to challenge her. And the result of all that bloodshed? A 40-year reign. Think about that. One of the longest and, according to a lot of historians, one of the most effective in all of Chinese history. Her path was unbelievably bloody, but it led to absolute and lasting power. You have to understand, for Empress Wu, the calculation was brutally simple. As a woman in that system, she had no natural claim to the throne. Any hesitation, any rival she left standing, would mean her own death. The choice for her was clear: crush them all or be killed herself. Now you might think this is all just some ancient Chinese court drama, but this idea, it's been a core belief for strategists all through history. You know who really nailed the cold logic of this? Machiavelli.
He argued that if you inflict a small injury, you've just created an enemy who's going to seek revenge. But if you inflict a great one, total annihilation, you leave them with absolutely no capacity for vengeance. From a purely strategic point of view, it's the safest bet.
And this idea isn't isolated at all. We see it pop up again and again across history, across different disciplines, from the military philosophy of Sun Tzu and Clausewitz, to historical accounts of Moses, and even the modern tactics of Mao Zedong. The logic is always the same. A partial victory is just a pause before the next inevitable
Okay, so this all sounds pretty convincing, right? But here's the big question. Is this law always the right move? Does it hold true in every single situation? Or are there times when total annihilation is actually a huge mistake?
You better believe it. The source material itself points out that this strategy, as powerful as it is, comes with its own significant dangers. And this is where things get a little more nuanced. So, on the one hand, if you crush an enemy completely, you can create such deep bitterness that they spend decades plotting their revenge. Think about Germany after the Treaty of Versailles. But on the other hand, sometimes it's actually wiser to leave a cornered army an escape route instead of forcing them into a desperate, bloody last stand.
And this, right here, is the paradox at the heart of it all. If you show mercy, you risk emboldening an enemy who, by the way, still hates you. But if you act with total ruthlessness, you might just create a martyr or inspire a quest for revenge that lasts generations. Both paths are absolutely loaded with risk. But you know what's wild? After laying out all these risks, the source material ultimately doubles down. It concludes that the danger of mercy, of leaving that viper alive, is almost always greater than the danger of ruthlessness. And if they do come back for revenge years later, the solution is simple. Just crush them again. So that's what we're left with. It seems there's no perfectly safe path when you're dealing with a determined enemy. It puts the ball in your court. If you were forced to choose, which risk would you rather take? The immediate threat of that viper you spared, or the long-term threat of the bitter enemy you created?